Welcome to the Westwood Planning Board meeting. All meetings are recorded by Westwood Media Center and filmed live on Westwood Media Center's YouTube and local government channels, Comcast Channel 12 and Verizon Channel 42. As a friendly reminder, please turn off your cell phone ringers and please stay muted while not speaking to assist with clear audio. The meeting will be civil and all people will be treated respectfully. The format of the meeting will be when an item is called by the chair, the applicant will present their application to the board will proceed to staff comments, the board members will ask questions of the applicant and have board discussion. For public hearing items, the public will then be given the opportunity to comment. Items that are not in a public hearing, the opportunity for public comment will be at the discretion of the board chair. Please only one person speaking at a time and allow a moment for the Zoom audio to catch up. When it's time for public comment period for public hearings, the chair will ask those wishing to speak to use the raise hand feature in Zoom, or attendees may type a question in the Q&A section. To raise your hand, click on the raised hand icon at the bottom of the screen and wait for the host to call on you and unmute you. You may then click lower hand afterwards. For those participating by phone, you can raise your hand by pressing *9 and wait for the host to unmute you. Once unmuted, please identify yourself by stating your name and address for the record. Please direct all comments and questions through the chair. All people will be given the opportunity to speak, but in the interest of time and fairness, repetitive or off-topic comments may be cut short. For items that are not a public hearing, public comment is at the discretion of the board and chair. For items, that are not a public hearing, it's encouraged to place comments in the Q&A and the chair may read and respond. Attendees will not be on video, but will be unmuted if called on during the public comment portion. All right. Abby, any changes to today's agenda?
There are no changes.
Okay. So first up, we have, sorry, I got to pull up the agenda. Why don't you tell me what's pulled up on the agenda?
The first item was the the A&R from
Stonegate Lane A&R. Address is 9 and 11. And are the applicants here?
No, I don't see the applicant here. So I can summarize what you had in your packet. There was an A&R plan for 9 and 11 Stonegate Lane. These two lots were created as buildable lots as part of the subdivision for Stonegate Lane. That road is, one side of the road is in Westwood and the other half is in Dover. These two lots were created, but I believe the original owner of number 9 purchased both lots and had just never built on the second lot and was using one lot, the one lot for the house, and the driveway went over the lot line, and there were some accessory structures such as a shed and a little pergola pavilion that crossed the lot line. The owner contacted us about selling the lot and making them both buildable. So they have submitted the A&R plan that changes the lot line for the side lot line in between the two lots to get the accessory structures all on one lot, or to meet the setbacks on the other lot. So that middle side lot line was adjusted. There's also a note in the plan that the driveway, the connected driveway, has to be removed before it can be considered buildable. So essentially this is changing the lot line between the two. They meet the lot size minimum is met in the SRC zone, and they both have frontage on Stonegate, the minimum 125 feet. So I think you can endorse it or vote to endorse it. And then when you're available, if you don't mind coming to Carby Street, we're open during business hours and we can get that signed.
Okay, any board comments or questions? Abby, once we sign the A&R, they obviously have to remove those structures that you talked about, but once we sign it, it's pretty much done from our perspective, right? Who holds their feet to the fire about removing the driveway and that pergola?
So after it's signed, the plan needs to be recorded at the Registry of Deeds. And then to get a building permit for that vacant lot, we would need to make sure that those were removed. So that would be the building, fall on the building department.
But they still could sell it as is, right? They just can't build on it. And I don't know who would buy it if they couldn't build on it, but so that's up to the due diligence of the buyer to make sure that they followed through on that.
Right.
Okay. No comments, no questions?
Yeah, I following up on that, I think we've had this situation in other places in town, right, where things were bought and sold and built without kind of conditions being met completely. It just makes me a little bit nervous. I appreciate that there's nothing we can do once we sign it, but I do just want to say I have reservations about people doing their due diligence. It's not the responsibility of the planning board, but I'm nervous about folks not doing their due diligence. But other than that, I have no problems with it.
All right. So with that, I think we can entertain a motion to vote to endorse the A&R.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All right, we'll do a roll call vote. Tom,
Yes.
Ellen,
Yes.
Kate,
Yes.
Dave,
Yes.
and I vote yes as well. Okay, so that's 5 votes in favor, none opposed. We don't need to close this, right, Abby?
Right.
Okay. All right. Next on the agenda is solar discussion. Is that right?
Right. Or you can use tonight as a zoning work session. We didn't have any other applications come in.
Right.
So I thought we'd focus on, getting started on the zoning amendment process. Now we have a special town meeting for the Hanlon School scheduled for October. We don't know if there's going to be then another town meeting in November. I suspect not. That's the recommendation is to not have one and to propose these zoning articles for spring town meeting. So how that schedule works is my recommendation is that you continue to work on zoning amendments, in the summer, in the fall, and then when the annual town meeting warrant opens, that's usually in December, and then it closes in early January. So I recommend you keep working. That way, in early January, you're ready to submit your zoning articles and start that public hearing process. And that public process begins in January and continues through the end of March for the May annual town meeting. So one that we've talked about, it came up earlier in the year, and then also when we were reviewing the comprehensive plan, was revisiting our zoning for solar. Right now, the way the zoning is written, it requires ground mounted solar. So that's ground mounted on residential or commercial properties. So that's when the solar panels are, not on a building, but on the ground, is a special permit from the Zoning Board of Appeals. And then solar that's affixed to a roof of a principal building that is directly to a building permit for a residential, 1 or 2 family residential property. And then it's reviewed either within a full EIDR for you, if it comes in during a project, or as an administrative EIDR for a commercial property, for the ones that are on the roof of a building. What we found over the last couple of years is some opposition from the ground mounted solar in the residential neighborhoods, especially. We've had, I think, about 3 or 4 of those applications come in over the last 4 or 5 years. The preference is usually for the solar to be on the roof. So that's the most common application, but at times, depending on, the location of the house, where it gets the most sun and, the condition of the roof and what that looks like, we've had 3 or 4 applications for ground mounted at residential, and they have not been approved by the zoning board. So, I took a first draft that I provided to you. Ellen and I went to WEAC, the Westwood Environmental Action Council, last week and reviewed some ideas with them. So the current draft that I have is essentially, it recommends changing the ground mounted to be reviewed by the planning board as an EIDR. So that's an environmental impact design review. That would still be a public hearing with a public process where we would notify abutters, and that notification would go in the newspaper, and essentially takes it from the zoning board, but to this board. And then an EIDR it removes the discretionary approval. So it is something that the use itself can't be denied. And also in this first draft, it kind of outlines some more parameters than what we currently have. The way the zoning's written now, it just, there's no specific criteria for, what the zoning board should review when it reviews the ground mounted facilities. So in this new draft that included in your packet, and I can pull it up if you want to go through it. It tried to focus on the purpose to allow solar, but allow for the board to review the exact siting and the location and to consider impacts from abutters. It talks about meeting the setbacks for accessory structures. It talks about puts a height limit on. I suggested in this first draft, I suggested 20 feet. And that was based off of, there are the ones at the Eversource property, the solar panels that are over the parking spaces. The highest point on that is 20 feet. So that was where I came up with that. And then it also talks about the decision criteria that really aesthetics aren't a reason to deny the solar, but the board should be reviewing, the impacts, setbacks, and really focus on the public health, safety, and welfare of the abutters in the neighborhood. And then I also had some recommended changes in the definitions. That the way it's currently written now, a special permit is also required if solar is proposed on an accessory structure, such as a shed or a detached garage. So you might want to consider changing that to be if it's affixed to an existing structure, then that could be allowed by right. But so this is our first draft. If you want, I can pull it up on a screen. You can take a look at it. The WEAC group had some, suggestions. They had talked about, they were looking for ways to make solar easier for residential, and wanted you to consider, only requiring commercial or large scale solar to go to the planning board, and having, directly for the residential properties to go right to the building permit stage. So that's something for you to consider. Another option would be keeping it with the zoning board as a special permit, but adding more provisions of what the zoning board should use as a guide. So some of the provisions that we have in this first draft, such as the setbacks and the height, you might, if you wanted to stay with the zoning board, you could put that kind of criteria in there for the special permit with the zoning board. So looking for initial feedback and thoughts from the planning board tonight. And if you like, we can pull that up and go through that.
All right, thank you for that synopsis. Ellen, you were in the meeting at WEAC as well. Do you have any other thoughts that Abby didn't touch on?
No, I think her summary was really good. I'm happy that we're going to make some changes, because one thing that Abby had mentioned at the WEAC meeting was, if we're seeing denial after denial after denial for these special permits, then it's imperative that we do something. They shouldn't all be denied. That's not right. It means we need to look at our bylaw. We also need to make sure that we're in line with the state level law, which I'm not sure that we are right now. There's, right to solar laws that prohibit denying solar based on certain things. So I think it's really important that we look at our bylaw and make sure that we are encouraging and making it a little easier for people to, move forward with solar, and that also we are aligned with the state law and not violating that with our bylaw. So that was something that WEAC had brought up as well, that they had, they're aware of the state law and didn't think that the bylaw as written really was what it should be. So I'm glad we're looking at this and that we're going to do something to move it forward.
Mr. Chairman, if I may,
Sure.
Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 40A, Section 3 states, and I quote, "No zoning ordinance or bylaw shall prohibit or unreasonably regulate the installation of solar energy systems or the building of structures that facilitate the collection of solar energy, except where necessary to protect the public health, safety, and welfare." That's all you got for a hook.
So does that mean you could build a structure to facilitate the collection of solar energy, correct?
Yes?
Does that mean you're still beholden to the zoning bylaw about the height of the structure?
I
That we
think
can
you can have
impose that?
reasonable regulations around dimensions and heights and things like that, especially where they pertain to safety. Now, one of the things I've learned recently is you can't have them too low to the ground because they may not cool. So I think you can have reasonable regulation on dimension and close to lot lines and things like that, but you can't turn it down because it's aesthetically unpleasing to a neighbor.
What Abby, can you speak to what are the denials based on that we've heard, the four or so that you've heard? Do you recall?
I know one on Grove Street, the argument was that there were some, it impeded scenic views and there was an easement. I don't know that it necessarily was, right on an easement, but that was brought up. In other cases, or they may not have actually all been denials, but there are withdrawn because that was the direction the board was going in. And aesthetics in the residential neighborhoods is what's been the concern.
And so it sounds like the state basically is telling every town, let them build it. There's really nothing we should be allowed to do to stop.
I don't think they're saying let him build it. They're saying let's take away some of the impediments to building these facilities. There's a slight nuance there, but they're firmly coming down and trying to help develop more solar power within the Commonwealth.
And you mentioned they want them raised up because they don't cool down, and that's a safety
If they're
concern,
too
right?
close to the ground, my understanding and that is that it can create a problem for cooling them when they're operating. So you can't have them like right on the low on the ground. You need to have airflow underneath, in my understanding. I'm not an engineer. I don't play one on TV. That's just a basic understanding. There needs to be enough air circulation to cool the systems.
Okay. So any other thoughts from board members on moving forward, which direction we should take? Abby threw out a couple possibilities about maintaining it with the ZBA, or we take it over. Should we continue with or should we move forward with a public process as part of ground mounted? Right now, it's not part of the public process with the roof mounted. And Abby, I think you mentioned we might want to alter our roof mounted wording to allow for accessory buildings as well as principal, because in those areas of their lot, they're already developed, and why not allow them to put them on the roof in a detached garage or a shed or something?
Right, that question has come up. We've had some people kind of inquire about that, that they have a detached garage that got full sun, and what would they need to do to allow solar? As it's written right now, it's if it's on the principal building, it can go straight to the building permit. But the way the zoning bylaw is written now, if it's on an accessory or detached structure, it needs a zoning board special permit. That's one thing to think about. In the first draft you had, and in your packet, I also included the state's model guidelines for solar, and that focused on recommending for the large scale solar projects, the site plan review, which is Westwood's EIDR. That's what we call site plan review. So it's the public process, but not one that's discretionary.
I had some,
Yes, David, sorry.
that's all right. I was just trying to use the hand.
I just saw it. I'm sorry I didn't see it.
So I had a couple of thoughts. So I think it's a good idea. So I have two things, I guess, two sort of overarching ideas here. I would like us to make the bylaws more encouraging for individuals who want to do solar. I think kind of that's one theme. And second, I think we want to ensure that there's a public process for larger scale projects. So I think, first of all, on the accessory structures, I agree with that. I think that makes sense to consider roof mounted solar on the principal or the accessory buildings. I don't think there's a big difference in that. I think it's good to just anything on a roof, that we should just treat that all as roof mounted solar to eliminate any confusion about, is it a detached garage? Is it attached? Is it an outbuilding? Like, let's just make it all roof mounted solar be by right. The model bylaws, or the state's model bylaw, talked about having different sizes, or different sort of small scale, medium, and large. And actually, if you go back to the current bylaw that we have now, is the product of a change from about maybe 5 years ago. I think originally we had the concept of large and small based on the power. So I forget the exact number, but it was something like 10,000 kilowatts or less was considered small scale solar, and maybe 10, 15, so greater, anything greater was large scale. And so there was a special permit process for large scale and by right for small scale. But that we reviewed that like 5 years ago, and we said, let's just make it by right on the rooftops, and then ground mount, we would treat that separately and just keep this. So that's kind of why we're in the place we are now, is that we initially changed the bylaws so that roof mounted solar was without restriction, because we were getting situations where people with large roofs would come in and why do they need to get a special permit? Because they need a lot of panels and they have a large roof. And so that's kind of a change to this. But I think it's worth looking at. I don't think in the proposed draft bylaw it doesn't break it out by size. And I think that's an important distinction, because it's a very different scenario from the individual homeowner. Where for them it makes the most sense to have a ground mount array. That's a very different scenario from, for example, putting a 10-acre project out there. Doing a large project like that is it's a principal use. So I think one thing, it would be treated differently because of it not being, so like Shuttleworth, for example, it would have been a principal use of the property. It wouldn't just be an accessory use. But I think it's important in these bylaws to be able to distinguish between the smaller projects and the larger projects. So I think it might be wise to bring back that distinction based on the size, the area of it, not based on power, because the power numbers can change depending on the technology. But saying that small scale could be a certain size that's roughly what a homeowner would have on the top of all their roofs and stuff, or in the alternative in their yard if the roof doesn't work. And then the large scale would be things that are bigger, that are like a 1-acre project or bigger, and that larger scale would trigger an EIDR, because it doesn't make sense to have an EIDR, for an individual who's putting 40 panels in their backyard, but maybe it does for, an acre of panels. So I think that's another thought. As I read through the draft bylaw, I did have a question. There's a bond requirement in there for ground-based solar, and I wondered if that intended to apply to the smaller scale homeowner projects as well as the larger scale ones, or what's the reasoning behind that? Because it would be hard, I think, for an individual to post a bond for something that they're going to have there for 30 years.
In the draft I included a special section on when it was kind of the principal when solar was a principal use in, such as like commercial or institutional or industrial properties, and when it's a principal use. So such as that was the only land use of the land is the solar. So like the solar farms. I included a section with additional requirements. That's where the bond was. So my suggestion in this draft was that the planning board may require a bond. And the idea was for commercial properties. So if it were to be abandoned at some point in the future, the planning board could ask for a bond. That was suggested in the state model, and the planning board has done stuff like that for when, such as when you have wireless facilities, when a new tower is constructed, you require a bond in case that's abandoned, so that the town could someday, if that was left there, have the means to remove the structure. And then there was other requirements that I added, in the first draft that was intended to be for commercial properties or when it's a principal use. So the larger scale, such as a solar farm, was an operation and maintenance plan, a lighting plan, a signage plan, and utility notification. So the idea was that wasn't necessarily required for the small scale at the residential properties, but when it was the large projects and commercial projects.
Do we need to make a distinction on size, or just by being principal versus accessory use, would that be enough?
It's up to it's up to the board. The way this draft was written, the first draft was principal use, and then also required for commercial, institutional, and industrial and municipal properties. So essentially, if it wasn't residential and if it's on the ground, but the planning board could change it to over a certain size too.
So if it's commercial, forgive me for interrupting, if it's commercial, no matter the size, if it's a commercial property and they're getting a ground mounted, we're going to see it before us.
As written, if it's on the ground, yep, either as written right now in this first draft, all the ground mounted would go to the planning board.
Yeah, I like the idea of doing principal and accessory use versus size, because we have some homes that could create, they have very large lots or large lots, I guess. They could create almost as big as a commercial. And if we just throw a number out there, we may have to revisit that number once technology kicks in and these panels can be smaller or big. I don't know. It just seems like we're hitting a moving target. We're shooting at a moving target if we go with a number right now. But if we go with use, principal or accessory, then we'll stay consistent throughout. I don't see a real need to change that. Based on what you just said, that seems to me to be a logical place to go.
So I'm sorry to keep interrupting and not put my hand up, but I do want to say that I also support the idea of, even for residential, we do want to have some reasonableness built into that. Because it could be you live there, but you're in a business.
Yeah, I would, to that point, I was thinking as we were talking, are we presuming that these residential ground mounted or roof mounted are designed to simply supplement or supply power to that particular home? Or are we allowing for them to build something twice as big as they need so they can sell the power back? Is there a distinction made by the state on that?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
I think that it gets to like the principal versus accessory use, maybe, because you could imagine that if someone, there's not a lot of these, but if you have, a 5-acre property, with your 15,000 square foot house on it and a big field, yeah, it's like it's literally a solar farm. You might want to fill the property with solar panels, and it's like you are harvesting the energy and selling it. And so that starts to become, again, very different from an individual situation. I don't know if that becomes, but is that a principal? Is that the principal use, or is it? It is literally like a solar farm.
do we have to determine what is surplus and therefore now accessory? And who knows how much, and one homeowner may use twice as much energy as the next
Yeah, I
in the
mean,
same size house.
I don't like the idea of having a cutoff. I mean, there already are cutoffs in terms of the incentive programs and also like we could only do 10,000 kilowatts or something, and we actually could do more. Like we need more because of our all electric heating and electric cars and everything. But so I don't think we should be telling people, you can only break even. But there's the scenario that I described of the person that's setting up a farm in their backyard with solar panels. I think, yeah, that's something that it should trigger the EIDR process. It should trigger a review that is more public, than just, okay, I'm putting solar panels up.
But even if we have that public EIDR process, it sounds like, based on what Mr. O'Hearn read to us, we don't have a lot of teeth to ask them to alter their plans.
Public health, safety, and welfare.
Yeah, and let's presume no one's going to build something. No contractor's going to come in and build something. They would need to comply with building code and things like that. So I guess we presume public health, safety, and what was the third? Welfare would all be met. And now we're talking about the likely scenario of someone living in a residential neighborhood and their affected neighbors that we've notified through this public process to come listen to us. And yet now we have, presuming those three things are met, most people are going to be there to say, I don't want to look at a solar farm in my backyard, in my neighbor's backyard. And we won't have any say over the matter with regard to aesthetics.
Well, you can impose reasonable conditions. For example, I think I didn't include this in the draft too, that you could, the planning board could require screening for abutters. So not thinking directly around the solar because it still needs to get the light, but possibly
As you say, screening will provide shade.
Well, at the lot lines, there could be some plantings or fencing.
And while we're talking about that, it's another stray thought that entered my mind. Almost in retaliation, what if a neighbor plants trees that will now create shade because they don't want to look at that? What can happen there? Is that just a neighbor dispute? Or have they now infiltrated into their backyard and now they're violating their rights to a solar farm? I don't know. These are just thoughts that are coming to my mind that.
Well, that's the whole, like, is there an easement of light or something, like, just if you block the sunlight off of someone's property, then you're denying them, So, I think though this is a significant change. It's a good change, is to say, to move from, what's been happening, I think, is that it wasn't clear what the criteria was for the approval of the special permit. And so people with objections, it's not just what reasonable conditions can we impose to try to mitigate the problems that people are raising. It was like, well, if enough people raise problems, then the permit's going to be denied. I mean, that's kind of what I feel like the current system is. And so if you do, we need to change the bylaws to match what the Attorney General is saying. It doesn't take away control. You would be able to, if someone's going to have a solar farm in their backyard, then we would want to review that and have conditions like, reasonable conditions like we would for a lot of other things that people build on their property that tends towards more of a commercial purpose. But you just can't deny it outright. And that's, I think, what's been happening. Well, I mean, it's more of it's not just, okay, we'll plant some trees to shield the view, and then people say, yeah, that's not enough. So then people withdraw the application or it's denied. But I think under this approach, we could still require things be done that were reasonable. But it doesn't end it. Like, it doesn't say you can't deny the permit. In the same way, for a public project, I would say that going through, knowing that there was if some let's say that the town was proposing to build a large solar farm, there would need to be this public EIDR process. And although you could not deny the permit, that process would lead to a lot of public input and a public discussion and, pressure. If it really wasn't in the public interest, you'd have a public argument about it, and it would, there'd be a vote at somewhere beyond the planning board. It would not be up to the planning board to deny something or to approve it. We do the best we can to meet the concerns, and then it's a political question after that.
But that's in a municipal situation.
Yeah, I'm just again thinking of the things that have come up in the past here. But
yeah, I'm trying to envision a commercial application where they would want to essentially own land to create a solar farm, ground mounted. I don't see that happening in Westwood. I see them wanting to put it on the roofs of their existing buildings. I see this more likely coming in play with the residential. Personally, I don't think anyone will have an opposition to a roof mounted, be it commercial or residential, for the most part, at least not a reasonable objection. But the ground mounted, where you have neighbors with backyards abutting one another, it's going to be a change, and we know people hate change. And I think, I'm not saying we need to create a bylaw that allows us to deny it based on aesthetics, because I'm hearing what the state is saying. I'm just trying to play this out, and how is this going to reflect on our town, and how are we addressing we're a bedroom community with houses next to each other. And it's almost like we're saying, this is more important than you being happy with your view. And I get it. I understand the need to allow people to put this in. But I think it's almost irresponsible of us to just ignore the neighbors' sentiments. So I don't know. I'm glad we're talking about this right now. I'm glad we're not in the 11th hour just trying to come up with a solution right now, because I think we do need to hash this out, and we have roughly 5 or 6 months to kind of come up with something that we think collectively will work for our town. I keep thinking about, I said, if they plant trees in retaliation, what if the next door neighbor is a ranch house and they decide to turn it into a colonial, and now it's casting a bigger shadow? Whose rights supersede who there? These are things I think we have to consider. All these things, we're a planning board of all our residents, not just those that promote solar. So, Kate, you had your hand up. Sorry, first.
Yeah,
That's the first one I saw. Ellen, if you did first, I apologize.
Actually, Ellen's first, and she's probably
Okay, I
going to say what I'm
apologize.
going
I
to
saw
say.
Kate's up, then I saw Ellen's. Yes, Helen.
No, I actually, I'm really glad we're having this conversation, because, all these points are really salient. I think it's going to be a delicate balance between what we have to do to comply with the law. Like, we can't allow denials based on aesthetics, but having the checks and balances, like the kind of conditions we can impose or suggest or whatever. And so I would support maintaining some sort of public process as part of this change, for exactly the reasons you outlined. I know there are some folks that would like to see it all by right with no public process, but for all the reasons you just outlined, I think that it's important to keep either Abby as an administrative review, or our board, or a board as part of that, to have these conversations and to have the ability to impose conditions that would be, to mitigate some of the impacts on the neighbors. I think that's important.
Are you referring to just the ground mount, or
Yeah.
all solar? Okay.
Just I fully support expanding, the definition of rooftop to accessory structures as well. I don't think there needs to be a distinction there. If it's a detached garage or a shed, if you have a big enough shed, you can fit some solar panels on it. I think right now it's kind of an impediment to ask people to have to go through a hearing process to put it on an accessory structure. So I'm okay with that. But for the ground mounted stuff, and it's an interesting conundrum as far as if someone has the space to build something larger scale, Yeah, at what point is it no longer an accessory use and becomes more of a primary use? I think that that's something we need to talk about more too. Good conversation.
Thanks. Kate,
Yeah, so I agree. I feel that the adding solar to the rooftop of an accessory building is like a no-brainer. Like that seems really great. I do want to just, you know, I am concerned about like residential solar farms, but I think there's certainly things we have enough time to be super thoughtful about how we approach this. And the reality is for solar to work, you have to have the right conditions, right? So out of the gate, it's not, you know, the town, it's not going to be rampant throughout the town that we're going to see residential, you know, and it doesn't appeal to everybody. So to put it on your own property. So I appreciate that we're being really thoughtful. I don't think we're going to be overrun with residential ground mounted solar panel. But I do think it's a really good conversation, and just like anything else that people want to do on their own property, they bought in Westwood, and they, you know, if that's how they want to use it, you know, they can paint their house any color, I think. So so these are things I appreciate the balance. I'm glad we're having the discussion, and I appreciate everybody's points. It's gonna, I think we're gonna come up with something really, really good at the end of this process.
okay, thanks. Pat, you had something?
Yeah, I just want to say, how do I shut my hand off? This is a very complicated situation. And Chris, you were almost masterful at making it even more complicated with some of
Sorry.
the things you brought up. No, it's fine. It's almost like a law school exam. So I want to encourage you to not be discouraged that it's not a quick process, because drawing lines like this is never a quick process. And I want to encourage you to think about how, as a process, you want to go about it. Now, one of the things that I thought worked very well this past spring was the group that Abby put together to work on the medical uses stuff. They got a lot of input from a lot of people, and they worked very well together. And there was input from a couple planning board members. So it never got that far away from the planning board. So this is not a legal opinion. This is my 2 cents, but I would urge you to consider a process like that moving forward to draw the lines where you're going to have to try and draw them.
So you're advocating the creation of a working group
Yeah.
involving some planning board members and some members of the public, or other boards or committees, or.
And you
Okay.
don't have to decide that tonight.
Sure.
But you can decide, at least you can move process-wise that way if you so choose, or not.
No, it was very effective, I think, in moving the medical use process through. So your point is well taken. And I think that's something we, discuss or think about before our next meeting in August. Dave.
I do think we have the opportunity to work with WEAC on this back and forth a lot. So I think that might accomplish the same sort of goal. And it would have one of the problems with the working group thing. It was not public, that was not a public process. And so there were meetings of people that were, the bylaws were changed and all that. But if we go back and forth with WEAC, then it provides a public forum to continue the discussion on these solar issues.
Well, I think, Pat, if you can remind me the reasons we went through the process that we did with medical use. You have to be very careful about running afoul of public meeting.
You do, and they were. And Abby's very good at it, and she headed that up. And I'm not going to go too far, and hopefully not let you step outside the bounds on that as well. And with all due respect, Dave, you're right. Some of those meetings weren't publicly open meeting law meetings, but anything that was decided through an open meeting law process. So it had enough open meeting law process, but there was enough working time to allow people to consider various things and get it before the public. And that, if you recall, that medical uses thing changed twice before it got to final verse. So
As a byproduct of bringing it to the public, that's when things changed.
Right.
They took the working group information, brought it to the public reacted, things changed, public reacted again, things changed again.
right.
Okay.
And that's how things are supposed to work.
Okay, well, like we said, we do have some time to consider how we want to move forward with this as a working group. If the board is in agreement that a working group would be beneficial in this particular situation, we will continue to discuss it, the solar, basically, until we're done. At just about every one of our future meetings, we'll be talking about this at some length. So, Abby, what would you like from us tonight with regard to this?
I think you've given us, I've heard from you all and some good information. Also, I think there is something in the state law that talks about protecting sunlight, a right to sunlight bylaw. So I could look into that and, in the state model, in the state law, and provide some more information on that. It may need to be like a separate bylaw, but it's related to solar. So I can look into that for your next meeting. My initial recommendation on this was that we can work on this at your next meeting, and then also we can continue to work with WEAC. I mean, right now you had some time on your agenda, so I didn't know if it was necessary right now to create a working group to meet in between, because we already have a good draft, and so we might have some time. But if we feel like we're not getting enough done at the meetings, then a working group would be helpful. My recommendation for the next article that I wanted to work on about the housing choice, I think you might want to. I think that would be helpful. I think we'll all need to work on that as a board. But then the idea of the working group that we've done in other cases and other projects, but also with the medical uses this last year was, you're limited and your time is limited when you have your full board meetings. You'll often have many applications on. So there's only so much you can get done at your regular meetings. The idea of the working group was to have no more than a quorum. So it can be no more than 2 planning board members, and we possibly some other members from some other stakeholder groups that could meet kind of in between your meetings. That way you can get some of the footwork done, some of the details on, background research, and weigh in between, and then bring those forward to you at your regular public meetings.
Okay. Any other comments about solar and what we've discussed? I don't want to.
Actually, I'll just add one more too. If you want to think about it, for your next meeting is, do you think it belongs with the planning board, or adding the similar criteria, but keeping it with the zoning board as a special permit? About a year ago or 6 months ago, that was my initial thought, was to develop the special permit criteria so that the zoning board knew what to look for when reviewing applications and limit their purview. But then as I started working on this, I thought an EIDR with the planning board, so it takes away that denial. That's how it came forward to you right now in this first draft, but that's something to think about. How it's a little bit different is, the planning board doesn't usually have residential applications. For single family residential, it's really only the earth material movement is the only kind of single family residential project that is reviewed by you. Usually you're focused on the commercial properties. So just something to think about.
So basically, you're saying if we send it to ZBA, then it's a special permit, and then it's a denial possibility.
It is, yep, so that would
If
be.
we
the
keep it
case.
with us, it's an EIDR.
Yep.
Okay. Are you looking for an answer or for us to think about it for the next 3 weeks or so?
Well, if you have a strong opinion now, or, if you have a strong opinion now, or as you go forward, kind of think about what that'll look like, because essentially you'll have, residences that you may know coming to you with their solar request. So it's kind of a different application than a planning board, typically sees.
Kate,
So, so Abby, if we have solar with us as an EIDR initially, can we later change the process so that when, we go through a year of this, 2 years of this, can we then change it to be through the zoning board, or is it forever?
It would have to go through a whole zoning amendment process like we're doing now.
the
So-
town would have to tell us we can do that.
Town meeting would have to approve it with a 2/3 vote if you're going to change the zoning bylaw.
Okay, and just to circle back to what we were saying about the idea of a working group. I've just got a 1-year seat on this board, and I'm very interested to see all the parts of the conversation that happen with this. So I'm slightly opposed to a working group because I want to be able to see what's happening without having the responsibility of being on the working group, if that makes any sense. So I just wanted to throw that out there as people are thinking.
Okay, Dave?
Just thinking about the planning board versus, or whether it should be the planning board or the CPA. I mean, since it's a public health, safety, welfare, it's kind of a all the town concern. Like, to me, it feels like that should be something that's the planning board. And I don't want to I see there's people here from the ZBA who might have some thoughts on this, but I'm just thinking that typically ZBA, isn't it more about working with the closest people to it? And I think planning board is taking into account the overall town impact and everything. So to me, it seems like something that is appropriate for the planning board to be conducting the EIDR on. And it's just more, it feels like a more responsive option.
Tom?
I'm the new guy with probably a shorter term than Kate. Seems to me that it belongs with the planning board. And it seems to me that we should be doing everything we can to encourage this use, consistent with the problems with neighbors having problems with these solar farms. But I think it should be a planning board responsibility.
Okay. Pat, you had something?
Yeah, there's 2 comments in the question.
Yeah, I just saw those.
That I just wanted to bring to your attention, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, okay. I was waiting until we were comments done by the board, and I'd read the 2 comments. Kate, just to go back to your perspective before, you were not advocating the formation of a working group, or you just didn't want to be a part of it?
I'm not advocating the formation of a working group because I want to be able to see what the working group is saying. I want to be able to observe the conversations without being, without having a responsibility to the working group, if that makes sense.
But if
It
there's
does
no
to me.
working group, then you have nothing to listen to.
Well, then the work happens in a more open and public way.
It happens here at these meetings is when it would happen.
So I know it's a confusing point of view, Chris. I hear you. I don't know. I'm of 2 minds about the whole thing.
And just, I think the presumption is we would be done by next April. So your participation in a working group would not
Yes.
be prohibited.
With all due respect, Mr. Chairman, I think you better be done before April if you want to get it in front of town meeting.
Yes. But that's when Ms. Wynn's term is up. So
True,
that's why I brought it up.
true.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? And I'll read the, oh, Dave, yes.
I'll just echoing what Kate was saying. I don't think, I think that it would be difficult to err on the side of public input here. I think that, you know, probably right now, most folks in town are not even aware that this issue is being brought up for consideration. And it would be very easy for me to cast it in a controversial, you know, light, you know, to say planning board, well, I don't want to go there, but you know, it's an issue that I don't think we would be harmed by. Planning board doesn't have time to talk about it for hours and hours every week, then let's say, okay, get some more feedback from WEAC and put it on their agenda. They can have at their public meeting, they can invite some comment and then bring it back to us. I think that can be managed. You know, I think we can come up with identifying the issues that we want to make decisions on, kind of like tonight. We've said it seems like we might have a majority that agrees planning board is the right place for the decision. But you know, I think we can work through that. I don't think that the benefits of having a working group taking it out and doing more research and coming back with proposals are outweighed by the potential for it's better to have more public meetings. So that's my 2 cents.
Okay. Okay, I don't know what that is, but I'll read the questions or the comments. At 7:35, Stephen Olenoff said, why not say that an accessory solar use becomes a principal solar use when the footprint of the solar exceeds the total footprint of all buildings on the site? And next was Avi Glazer. Are we considering benchmarking with other towns? Abby, maybe you could speak to that second comment.
Yeah, I could pull some information on what other towns are doing. I haven't looked into it too much, so I can pull that for your next meeting.
I think there are many towns around the Commonwealth that are in the exact same stage we are in, and there's some that are further down the road, and we can definitely learn from them and, you know, use their wheel instead of reinventing our own, at least parts of it. And any comments about the first question that I read or comment about accessory solar becoming a principal when a footprint exceeds the total footprint of all the buildings on the site? I don't have a knee-jerk reaction to that. I have to look into, you know, our definition of accessory or principal, and or we have to come up with that. So I think that's all part of this process, and it's a suggestion. So I think we just take that as a suggestion that it was. Okay. Last chance for comments about solar. I think, Abby, you've seen, I would agree that this belongs with the planning board with regard to the public process on the hearings. So I don't think I weighed in on that, but I think every other board member did. So I just wanted to do that.
Sorry, just,
Sorry,
I was
Ellen
thinking,
Ellen has her hand up too.
Yes, I just saw that.
Sorry.
Ellen?
Sorry. Yeah, just to, you know, throw in my 2 cents. I do agree as well that it seems to make sense that this process would be under the purview of the planning board for all the reasons already stated. And I also, I support what both Kate and Dave have said about a working group. I won't rehash the reasons because they articulated it beautifully, but I would lean towards not wanting to form a working group for this and partner with WEAC instead. That would be my preference.
Dave?
I was just thinking about in terms of the accessory use versus principal use, if it's helpful, it's kind of like, when does a garden become a farm? You know, like if you have a garden in your backyard, or are you, you know, when you
sell more than you eat?
I don't know, but just that might be a good way to a way to think about it, but for another time, not tonight.
Pat, can you touch on if this board essentially pushes it back to WEAC to create this or give us some feedback, so our planning board members would not be permitted, at least no more than 2, to sit in on the WEAC meetings?
That's correct.
And we would rely on their processes to comply with the open meeting law.
That's correct.
Okay.
Have to be posted. Agenda has to be posted 48 hours before the meeting, excluding weekends and holidays.
And
Yeah.
can the meeting deviate from the agenda, the stated purpose of the meeting?
That's not a good thing to do.
No, just sometimes discussions take you to different places.
Well,
And
if it
that's kind
falls
of,
under, yeah, if a discussion under an agenda item goes a little bit far afield, you probably got covered that way. But if you start talking about other things that are outside the scope of the agenda item, that's when you may go afoul of the open meeting law. You know what I'm saying?
yeah. And I believe that was one of the major reasons that we decided to form a working group for the medical use, was to allow us that freedom to explore possibilities without running afoul of the stated agenda
Right.
publicly. It was intended to be literally a working meeting so that we could talk about all possibilities. To
And
come
you
up
could
with solutions.
barnstorm ideas from what I recall.
I'm sorry?
You could barnstorm ideas.
Yeah, and if we do a work or not a WEAC meeting, then the barnstorming can't be quite as free as a normal conversation may be.
Very true. And the other thing you have to remember is nothing's going to change without a complete open public process, 2 FinCom hearings and a town meeting. I don't think you can get any more public than those 3 things. And your meetings as well. You're going to have to meet and discuss what you want, take it to FinCom, defend it in front of FinCom twice, and then take it to town meeting and try and advocate for its passage. That's pretty open.
Okay, well, this board will move on however the board elects to move forward on this. So we'll talk about that, next time, I guess, about solar. Yes, Dave.
Sorry, a different topic. I just wanted to, it occurred to me that related to this issue of our of solar panels and everything is just the idea that before we have talked about, so for commercial projects, whether we might want to have greater incentives for special projects, developments to have solar, as a part of the review process. There's been, what can we do? Like often when we have the EIDR for a special permit or something, board members have asked questions like, can you put solar on that? And the answer is, well, we'll look into it, but is this an area that we would want to consider additional changes to our bylaws to create more incentives or requirements that new construction include renewable energy? Like, I know that's a whole big other topic, but I wanted to throw that out there and see if that was something we wanted to consider in this cycle or not. And then I would not talk about it anymore, but it's, or at least not here, but that is something that has come up before, was the idea of like, can these projects come in and we'd like them to consider solar, and they say, sure, we'll do that. But there's not really a incentive or requirement that we can make them put solar panels on new construction. So is that something we want to consider as a board?
Well, I think the only real incentive for commercial use is money, and the money is tax cuts or something along those lines, and that would be under the purview of select board, I would presume. So that we'd have to work with select board to do something like that. Maybe there's other bones we could throw to commercial development that I'm not thinking of, but.
Well, there could be like, there could be density bonuses and things. There could be the same kinds of incentives that for like affordable housing or for other things that are, anything we wanted to encourage. I guess it would take some research into what those are, but and whether people would even want to go down that path. But you could come up with.
Yeah, I was thinking commercial more so than residential development, as you just mentioned, density bonuses and things like that. No, that's a good point. Good thing to think about. All right. I don't see any more Q&As. Any other board members? Thoughts before we move on? Abby, are you good with what we've conveyed to you, our thoughts on this, where we
Yes.
are right now?
Yep, I think we have enough time now that we have plenty of time with your meetings and WEAC meetings, that at your public meetings, we can continue to work on this.
Okay, good. All right, so seeing no more comments or questions or hands raised, let's move on to the next, which is the housing question.
So I have a little presentation that I'll pull up to so we can kind of walk through that. There's a new legislation that was passed by the state legislator in December, and it was signed into law in January. It's referred to as the Housing Choice Law. It was part of the Economic Development Bond Bill. So tonight we'll go through, the state law, what's required, and then we'll start the process on how we're going to bring an article forward. So in your packet, you had some basic information. I had uploaded the state law that changed. So there was a red line version. And then there was a couple presentations that I had received from the state, DHCD, that's the State Department of Housing and Community Development. They had given a couple presentations kind of summarizing the law and what it says. So that was provided in your packet. And then, I'm just trying to pull it together, the relevant pieces to Westwood. So just a moment, let me pull that up. All right, can you see my screen here?
Yes.
Okay. This is, it's referred to as Section 3A of the Zoning Act. The Zoning Act is Mass General Laws, Chapter 40A. That outlines the whole zoning process that all towns have to follow for amending and adopting zoning. In January, signed into law, it was this new act. And the purpose of it is to make it easier for municipalities to zone for and approve multifamily housing projects. Multifamily is a structure with structure that serves 3 or more dwellings. It's referred to as in supportive housing, and to encourage MBTA communities to adopt multifamily zoning as a right. As of right is often referred to as by right. It's where it's not discretionary, so not through a special permit process. It was signed into law in January 2021. And what this law really does, it's come up many times in the past. It hasn't made it all the way through until this last 8 months. But it's been discussed in the planning world and by housing advocates for many, many years. And the reason is it's come forward, housing advocates and planners had brought it forward to really, it aims to address the housing shortage that we see here across the region, in Boston, the suburbs, and in Massachusetts, to provide housing near public transportation and to make it easier to adopt, different types of housing. It's referred to as supportive housing. So to adopt it at the zoning amendment level, and then also at the project level when a project comes forward. And the reason for that is the housing supply over the last several decades has not kept up with the demand. That's led to high increase in housing costs. They've continued to, the housing cost has continued to grow over the years. And as a result, we have a lack of equitable housing stock. So we don't have a variety of housing, not just in Westwood, but across the region. We're largely, the suburbs largely consist of single family homes. And really the history of that is when zoning was first adopted in Westwood, but also across the country, zoning was created in the 40s, the 50s, and 60s. It focused on outside the cities. It focused on creating large lot and single family zoning, which historically disproportionately impacted people of color, older people with disabilities, and people of lower incomes. And the reason for that is because zoning was, set with these single family homes in mind, limited business districts, manufacturing or industrial was often, in the city or kind of hard to access locations. So the people that were able to live in the suburbs, had to have the means, had to have, a vehicle, access to transportation to get to jobs, and also had to have the financial means to, pay for the housing. So what we've seen over time, there has been, it created segregated communities. So communities across the state, across the country, are not equitable. They've been segregated by race and income levels for many years. And essentially, housing is a major part of that. Where you live has a profound impact on our communities. So essentially what this goal is focused on housing. Housing also helps, economic development opportunities in communities. And what this law does, it reduces the zoning amendment thresholds for zoning that promotes housing from a supermajority, which is in the past, it's always been a 2/3 supermajority vote required to change the zoning at town meeting. Also for special permits. So in the past, special permits have always been supermajority. So 4 members need to approve something. 4 members of a 5-member board must approve a project for it to go through. This law changes that for applications with multifamily housing, or certain what's referred to as upzoning, changes it from a supermajority to a simple majority. The law also outlines and provides opportunities for housing best practices. It does that there's a state incentive program called the 40-hour Smart Growth Districts that communities can adopt. That's a very prescriptive zoning overlay district process. Accessory dwelling units by right are encouraged with this new law, as well as starter home districts. And there are very strict provisions and requirements for MBTA communities. So that's what we should focus on tonight, and what really applies to Westwood as an MBTA community, because we have 2 train stations. So the law requires all communities that have to adopt at least one zoning district of a reasonable size where multifamily housing is permitted by right. So currently, our multifamily housing is only by special permit. It also requires, there's a minimum density of 15 units per acre. It must be located within a half mile from a commuter rail, subway, or bus station or bus terminal. So in Westwood's case, we're talking about the commuter rail station. No age restrictions, and suitable for families with children. Essentially, those last 2 requirements are trying to deter communities from trying to, include discriminatory practices in their zoning. So not limit the number of bedrooms, because if you have families, it is very difficult to find, an apartment or a multifamily, condo with more than 2 bedrooms. So the state is working on providing further guidance for communities. We don't have that yet. We don't know when that will come, but we know they said they're working on it. I expect that we'll probably focus on some of the ambiguous language, such as, a district of a reasonable size. Probably also exactly how you measure that half mile from train stations. That's probably the kind of guidance that they'll come out with. And so all MBTA communities have to adopt this zoning. It's not something we can opt out of. And as a consequence, communities that don't adopt the zoning aren't eligible for certain grant funds for various projects. Also, if a project comes forward, we won't have, a say in it. We won't be able to guide the growth. So the recommendation is for the planning board to work on zoning to bring forward to guide where you want these districts to go. This is a map showing Westwood's current zoning Westwood's current zoning map, and then here is a half mile, just, straight radius around the Islington train station and around the station on University Ave, showing this is the area that we're supposed to adopt the multifamily housing. This is an aerial view. The Islington station, it looks like it goes up to, this is Southwest Park off of Route 1. A little bit over the Glacier Drive, Willard Circles properties, partially down Washington Street. And then at University Ave, it looks like it's over where we currently have the Gables Apartments now. This is the condos at University Station. I'm forgetting what the name of them is at the moment. Pulte Homes condos. This is the Bridges assisted living facility here. Just a zoomed in view of the radius from the two stations. We have an interactive map that if you want to tonight, we can kind of zoom in on that and we can go through that. This is just these are just basic images of what 15 units per acre look like. These are cities showing large areas. So this is not, Westwood, our district just has to be a reasonable size. So it should be, reasonably related to how we, our other zoning districts in town. So, Westwood doesn't have, large commercial districts. So I think just as long as we're consistent in size with other zoning districts in town. And so what this board needs to do, so the recommendation is for you to start working on this, think about this, and bring a zoning proposal forward for our annual town meeting. So I think we should keep working on it for the rest of the summer and into the fall. And, we would submit to the warrant in December and then begin that public process in January. And that would continue through public hearings in March for the May town meeting. So you can create a new overlay district, that you can completely start on, a new one, or amend the existing zoning, either the base zoning or an existing district, to amend that to include the multifamily housing. Also, there is a provision about allowing accessory dwelling units by right. Westwood currently allows accessory dwelling units in all residential zones by special permit for zoning board. So to achieve that, you may want to consider allowing it by right in just one zoning district, or if you were to create a new zoning district near the train station, you could possibly consider the accessory uses there. But the accessory dwelling units, that does not have to be within the distance of the train station. And then providing, more types of housing was a major goal of the comprehensive plan in the recent housing production plan. So as you move forward, you'll keep those in mind. So my recommendation essentially is to begin working that, and I would recommend, we can see how this goes, but I think we should also work closely with the housing partnership. I had invited the housing partnership and the housing authority. I had notified them about the meeting tonight, so I can see a couple of them are on, and they may be interested as well, to work with you throughout this process in the summer and fall and into the winter.
Okay, thank you very much, Abby, for that. I could see Dave. I could not see Ellen while she was sharing, so I don't know which of you had your hand raised first. So
Dave was first.
Okay, Dave.
All right. So Abby, I just realized as you were presenting there, so it has to be half a mile from a train station or a bus station, I think. And so it's worth finding out, what about FMUOD 7? What about, because the bus station's all along Washington Street. Would it work? Would that also work, like the area off of Everett Street, that?
Yeah, the Foster.
Yeah, the
I
Foster.
forget what it's called.
And I don't know if that's.
Yeah, I was wondering that too. Abby, what you depicted on that map, that was as a crow flies, half a mile, correct?
Yeah.
So we still don't have guidance from that, but I was wondering about that also, Dave. Are they referring to using the words bus station the same as a train stop? Because we don't have a train station, we have a train stop. So I'm just wondering, are they referring to them as the same? I don't know that we know that, but I was thinking the same. FMUOD 7 would be a nice candidate here if the bus station were to suffice. Or if they went as a crow flies, as Abby showed on that map, it fell within that. I believe it was right there at that intersection of Clapboard Tree and Washington.
Right.
But
So
then
I think the law says bus station, not bus stop. So I'm hoping when the state does come out with guidance, that will be some of the guidance that they give us. But if in the image from the Islington station that just went, straight out in a radius, it was partially on that what we call the Foster Block property. So it didn't cover the whole property. It was just over the portion of that closer to like Frugal Fanny's property was in that as well.
earlier, Islington Pizza from the roadway is 4/10 of a mile away from the Islington train stop, just FYI. So it's significantly different if you go as a straight line or from the roads. Ellen, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I have a bunch of thoughts and questions, and some of them we may not have answers to, but I read through all of the materials on this, been paying attention to it since it came out because it's of interest. And I actually attended the CHAPA meeting a month or so ago with Steve, because I'm the alternate. So, but I did go. So a lot of this was presented and discussed there as well. So one of my questions also, like, the ambiguous language, like what does constitute a reasonable size? The 15 units per acre, does that mean a project would have to have a 1 acre minimum, or is it prorated? Like you can build 4 units on a 1/4 acre. Like, how is that going to work? So that's something I'm curious about too. Very interested. I saw one of the things I talked about as far as overlay districts go for the housing choice, not so much for the MBTA, or maybe there's some synergy there. Starter home districts. That's something I think a lot of folks in town have been saying they'd like to see for a long time. And now we kind of have a pressing incentive to move that forward. That's something I'd like to see this board talk about and see if there's something we can do that would, be feasible, that developers would actually be interested in doing to promote, more starter or downsized type homes. I think a starter home district would serve both of those needs. So that's something I'd really like to see us try and make happen. And then I guess my question about the accessory dwellings by right, do we know how that would impact our SHI? Because obviously if it's by right, there's no affordable requirement. And I know there'd been some debate back and forth as to whether or not accessory units are counted against the denominator. So do we have any insight into that? And is that something that we can try and proactively plan for if it's going to affect our denominator? I think that's something we as a board should also be thinking about. Where can we offset that? Obviously not in the by right area, but is there something we can do to offset that if we're going to have to allow accessory units by right as well? And those are the things that came to mind initially looking at these new guidelines.
Okay. Abby, I assume you don't have answers for that yet.
Right.
She's just-
So I think, I think we'll get more guidance from the state as we move forward. I don't think we can wait because we don't know when they're going to come out. So I think we just have to do our best, guess to try to meet the state requirements. But I think about the density, it says we have, we can't have restrictions that would be lower than that. So usually what most of our zoning currently, like our FMUD now, we use floor area ratio. So we don't have like a specific number, but we use a floor area calculation, which is essentially how it takes into account, how much you can build on a property, floor by floor compared to the lot or parcel size. So I think as long as the zoning isn't so restrictive that you cannot build less than that. So it doesn't mean the projects have to be that large, but the zoning can't be more restrictive. The accessory units, in terms of like what we are still waiting on from the census of how it would calculate all of, if the accessory units would be considered, a single family unit. We still don't have that answer. We might later in this year. We don't know that yet, but there is a lot of talk about accessory units as providing a more affordable housing option, kind of across the country, across the state. A lot of times, I'm not too aware of too many have gone forward as in accessory apartments being on the subsidized housing inventory to meet the statutory requirements to be affordable, but they're just a less expensive housing option than the straight market, because they're usually smaller accessory units to a primary residence.
Okay. Pat, you had your hand up.
Yeah, this bill passed in January, and I'm kind of amazed at the lack of guidance I've seen on a lot of the very good questions that you raised, Ellen, and other issues. And I've been watching the MMLA server, Mass Municipal Lawyer server, and there's really a dearth of information. But I agree with Abby. I don't think we're in a position to sit and wait for information on this at this point in time. I think we need to take our best stabs at complying, but yet remain flexible as information comes in. That's my only point.
So Pat, the way this, if we fail to be in compliance with this, we lose the right to certain state grant funds, right?
Yeah.
So there's a presumption that they understand what our timing is with regard to putting this through our town meeting. So if they don't get this to us till March, how can we advertise this zoning change properly?
Your presumption is perhaps an error, sir.
Okay.
You're
First.
You're giving a state perhaps way too much credit that they understand our processes.
So is that a possibility that we may have this dumped on us with a month and a half before town meeting?
I can't say that it is, but I can't say that it isn't.
All right. So all the more reason to move forward with our best guess as to what our direction should be.
Yeah, because at least then you have a defendable position. You can say, this is what we thought you wanted. We will adjust it next year, but we shouldn't be punished in the interim. It gives us something to work with.
Okay. Abby, I had a couple of things, but one of the ones that came to my mind was, what about if we're a half a mile from a Dedham train stop that's in Westwood? Or Canton, if there's a stop. I don't know if on that line there is a stop within a half mile, probably not, but I know there's one right across the highway, 128 in Dedham. Can we measure from there and find a spot? So I know you don't have the answer. That's a question of mine, and the bus stop thing would certainly open up other opportunities for us all up and down Washington Street, all the way, within our town. So, okay. All right. Well, we obviously have a lot of work to do, but I don't know if this is something that we're going to work with the Housing Authority.
And Housing Partnership. I was thinking really reaching out to the Housing Partnership. I believe we have two. I think you and Kate are the representatives from the Planning Board, so I recommend. I think the Planning Board needs to keep working on this at your meetings, at your time permits, and then also the Housing Partnership, and then we could also work with other boards and committees, and possibly a working group to meet in between meetings.
Well, I think there's a lot of open-ended questions here, but I think we need some guidance from you as far as how do we close the ones we can close or answer the questions we can answer. So, I mean, we're talking about it for the first time tonight. I think you've been looking at this for a lot longer than we have. So your understanding may be more comprehensive than ours, but we'll catch up. So I think it could be very helpful to have some guidance from you on all of these bullet point items. How can we, you know, how can we solve this Rubik's Cube that the state has handed us? Dave, you had your hands up? You're muted.
Muted, Dave.
Do we know, I mean, it's all sorts of lots of questions, but do we know about University Station? What impact, like Gables and all, like, is that area, like, do we know if we know anything for sure about that in terms of whether it could be used to qualify, or if it's not possible because it's a part of the development and nothing would be by right, or what's the?
So if we rezone it like an overlay district right there, is that what you mean?
I guess,
Or
do the apartments and all there, could they be counted to say, oh, we've already got a bunch of apartments, it's high density, it's close to the train station, we're all set?
I think, I mean, the condos were by special permit, and we did have strict bedroom limitations on that. So
And we
I
did
think,
also with the apartments, no
right, so
more than
both
2
both
bedrooms.
the Gables and the condos had the strict bedroom limits, and the condos were by special permit. So I don't think they would qualify. You know, I don't think that would count as we already have this. I think we'd have to make, you know, further amendments.
So basically, if we had seen this coming and we didn't put that requirement in there, we'd have some 3 bedrooms and we might suffice this requirement. Ellen, you had your hand up.
Yeah, that's actually that pinged another question. The way I was interpreting this change is it isn't so much about what we already have, it's about what we will allow. And correct me if I'm wrong in that, but I mean, to Dave's point, I don't know that there's anything preventing us from rezoning University Station to allow something like that by right. I don't know whether or not there's room to build anything else there, but I mean, am I correct in that? It's not, I mean, there may be towns that already have the zoning on the books. It's not about, do we have a building that fits the criteria? It's, do we allow this by right?
Right,
So,
yep,
if we don't-
Ellen's right, yep,
But we do have that
Ellen's right.
vacant land. near
Right, we do
Makita.
have to, we have to zone for it, so it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be, you know, physically there. But I mean, if these requirements were already met on the ground, you know, in construction wise, we would already have the zoning for it, and we don't. But we can create, you know, something the planning board can think about is, where do you want to have this district? So it could be at University Station, or you know, someplace that's already built up, because we have very limited vacant parcels. But the requirement is to allow, you know, provide zoning that would allow it.
Okay. Kate?
Thank you. Yeah, I am curious. So if we go with the assumption that both of our T stops, you know, the commuter rail and then 128 station, if we're assuming that both of those are going to be counted equally in by the state, is the requirement that we have a zone surrounding each of them, or that we have a zone singular for
They
the
said
town?
it at least one zone, so we
least
only
one.
have to do one zone.
Okay.
Pick the best zone closest to a train station. in
Okay.
town.
And it would be interesting to see if the train station in Dedham, at the Dedham Hilton stop, if we could do something off of that and meet that requirement.
Yeah, or if the bus stop were to meet the requirement.
If every bus stop on Washington Street qualified, you'd have all of Washington Street from
Right, so we need some more
from
guidance
Norwood,
there.
from Norwood to Dedham.
Right. All right. Abby, anything else you'd like from this board right now? as far as guidance or?
My first thought in response to that question is the law says, a half mile from within a train station, terminal. So it doesn't, right now, it doesn't say within your municipality. So, I think that gets at the idea of creating more housing in a transit-oriented way so that people are using public transportation. So it still meets the, regional and state goal of transit-oriented development near public transportation.
Okay, and I would just read one question in the Q&A from Avi Glazer. Just remember, the idea is to add affordable housing units and not to reshuffle what we already have. So that was his comment. Any other thoughts or comments from board members?
Yeah, the only other thing I just wanted to throw out there, thank you for asking, is, it could be that I'm just curious about this. It could be that we have two zones, one quite liberal and one a little bit more restricted.
In what sense? Liberal.
Um, Meaning the second zone, I'm thinking possibly the second zone is a little bit smaller and exists, but it maybe is smaller. And, we'd still have to be within the, basically, if we have one, if we have one qualifying zone, right, that gets us free and clear, to do what this is proposing to do, right, to foster people taking the train and making the area near them a more walkable community, and the good things that it's supposed to do. I think it could be that we end up with two that are not of equal size. And then my last question before we go is, could it be that Dedham chooses to zone in Westwood? Like, could we be forced to take someone else's?
They can't zone in our town.
They
They
cannot
might
zone our
use.
Great, just double checking.
All right, Abby, you had mentioned that there were some individuals here from Housing Authority. Oh, Dave, sorry, I missed your hand. Apologize.
Sorry, I keep muting myself and then I don't. So just a question, like, does the voting requirements, does that apply to this? Like, so in other words, let's suppose that we wanted to, like, the easiest thing to do would be just to add multifamily into the allowed use for a whole zone, like that would be one way. But let's say that if that's what was being proposed, is that something that when it goes to town meeting only requires a simple majority? That's part of the deal here, right?
Yeah. So I
Yes.
think this zoning that we bring forward will be the simple majority.
Which is a significant difference in getting something to pass. 2/3 is a very high hurdle to get to pass.
But what we're asking for them to vote on is basically an increase in density. None of these meet our current density.
Yeah, and I also think you're going to have to ask them to vote on creating a district where multifamilies are allowed. And let's be brutally honest, Westwood is a single residence kind of community. We don't have a lot of multifamily housing. So you're going to identify areas where you're going to say multifamilies are allowed by right. And this is the box in which that fits.
Right.
Town
No
meeting
special
says,
permits, no, yeah.
town meeting says yay or nay on a simple majority rather than 2/3.
Right. Yes, Ellen.
Yeah, with that in mind, I'm just thinking about what Dave said. I think he's right in that the simplest thing would be to rezone a whole zone. However, depending on what zone that is, that's a lot of neighborhoods that you would then be changing to allow up to 15 units per acre. That's a lot of density. So I think if we do propose a whole zone, we have to think very carefully about what zone we pick. Because even a simple majority, if a lot of people are hearing that their neighborhood is suddenly going to be potentially very, very dense. Like, I think we just have to be cognizant of, there might be some trepidation about that.
And it's not just potentially dense, it's dense by right.
Right, exactly. So
Right.
I think, initially my gut reaction was some sort of new district or new area rather than just trying to pick one that we already have and do something with that. Because I think we do need to, I want to encourage more affordable housing. I want people to be excited about this. I don't want people to be concerned about this. I mean, yes, I want people to be concerned and ask questions, but I don't want this to be looked at as a negative initiative. So I think it's imperative that we as a board are really cognizant of the fact that that would be a big change. To Pat's point, this is a single family town for the most part. That's why a lot of people choose to move here. If we want people to be excited and embrace the idea of more affordable housing, and with that comes a bit more density, I just think we need to be really mindful of that as we have these conversations and come up with some creative ideas on how to meet this requirement in a way that hopefully doesn't just meet the letter of the law, but embraces the spirit of it as well.
Thanks. Dave, you had your hand up earlier.
So just to clarify, the so like the current zoning for general residence, it's single family is the only thing that's allowed by right. Then there's this, you can get a special permit to convert to a 2-family, or you can have a 2-family by special permit. So is it, my question though is the density, is the 15 units per acre, it's also, you need that, whatever change is done, like it wouldn't be enough to just say you can have 3 or 4 family units, like it has to be done in a way that the density is also increased. Is that correct? Like, in other words, because you can make a case that, like, I mean, yeah, it's a single family. That was the design, that for the purpose of excluding people. But so it's not enough to simply change that and say, all right, well, we'll let there be 2 families by right in a certain district. Like, you also have to, the density is another element, right?
Or we just can't limit the so I think we could just not put a strict limit that would keep it under. Also, I just want to clarify, you could, it could be by right, but it could still be, multifamily by the EIDR process, because that's still by right, still be the public review process by the planning board. And also, this isn't necessarily affordable housing, it's multifamily. So multifamily would still be, market rate. We probably want to include an affordability requirement, I think.
I think I read that somewhere,
Okay.
10%.
So we might want to do an affordability requirement, but overall it's still can be, market rate. It's not all affordable. It's 3 or more units per building.
Okay. Kate?
Yeah, thank you. I did just want to say, as we're talking about multifamily, it's 3 or more, like it's not 2-family, it's 3.
Yeah.
So
Minimum 3 family.
that's minimum 3. So that's a huge change to any lot in town. And then the other thing I appreciated, I was going to ask that question, Abby, about it's not required affordable currently, like it's by right. So we don't get a shot at it. It hurts if people take up the opportunity to do that. And then so I appreciate anything we can do to put us in a better position with affordable units in here. And then the last thing I'm going to say, and this is kind of a joke, is can we make them put solar?
On the ground?
Yeah, exactly. Oh my God. No, but while we're doing good, why not do the best good we can do?
Okay. Something to think about. Any other comments from board members, questions? I guess we'll put it out to the attendees and see if there's anybody out there in the Westwood Housing Authority who would like to add in with a comment or have a question. You raise your hand. Give a few seconds here to see if anyone.
Or Chris, I don't remember if you said there's some other members of the public that aren't, associated with
Oh,
them.
yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to say just Westwood Health. If I did, I apologize. If there's anybody, I see 6 attendees here. One is Westwood Media Center, so I'll say 5. And I don't see anybody raising their hand with a question or a comment, so. Okay. All right, Abby, is there a time you'd like us to meet with Westwood Housing Authority, or how do you want to proceed with that?
Maybe, so our housing agent left, somewhat recently, so we don't have a housing agent yet, but I could maybe reach out to the housing partnership about scheduling a meeting with them, and we could do, a public meeting with them to introduce this law with them also, and let them know this is coming, and see if they'd be interested in serving, 1 or 2 members serving as a liaison for this while we work on this as we move forward.
Okay. Well, I think, who did you say? Kate and myself are the 2 representatives currently working with housing. I'd be happy to serve in that capacity but if someone else has a real strong feeling for it, I'm happy to do whatever. I don't know, Kate, if you're interested in working with them.
Yeah, I definitely am, in leveraging kind of their expertise and thoughts. And I'm curious, Abby, how you envision that going. Like, I'd love to hear more about how that would work. In understanding that we don't have an agent right now.
I think I'd probably schedule a meeting with them first to see, and then ask them as a group if they would like to have, get their initial thoughts, and then if they'd like to select, maybe one member that's not on your board that may want to participate at your meetings throughout the process to kind of be the liaison for that.
So you'd like them to liaison with us, not the other way around?
And then we could also work with them at their regular public meetings. So, myself and could go to those meetings too. So you would have your public meetings, their public meetings, and then a liaison for them that may attend yours.
Okay. So I guess firstly, so you'd like to have a meeting between now and our August meeting, and then invite them to come to our August meeting. And then from there, we'll move forward somehow, some way.
I'm not sure exactly how soon I'll get a meeting. It may not be, maybe in August. I just don't know if it'll be before your next August.
Sure. Yeah, if they can't get together, that's fine. Whenever time permits for a meeting. Okay. Does anybody on the board have a problem, an issue with that course of action? Has a better suggestion? Okay. All right. So I guess we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the Providence Highway
Right.
rezoning.
So there was another a property on Providence Highway. It's the gas station that exists there now at 394 Providence Highway. That is in the industrial office zoning district. They have approached us about updating their facility, renovating, creating a new convenience store building. It would be very similar to what they own down the street. And about 5 years ago, they renovated that station. It's at the Seasons Market and the gas pumps that's over, towards Dedham and near the highway. They want to do something very similar at this location. Part of the lot or part of the area that looks like on the ground, it looks like it's part of the lot, because some of the parking area for there is not zoned, because it was formerly part of the roads right of way. So they have expressed interest in having that rezoned so that the full project area would be in a new highway business zoning district. So it would be changing the zoning district from industrial office to highway business that allows the motor vehicle light services use, which matches, what's across the street where the auto dealerships are. So, they met with staff. They were interested in us bringing that forward and working with us on that. They haven't gone through the permitting yet, but I said I would bring it forward and, hear from this board. But I recommend this change. If you want, I can pull up the map, or you have it in your.
I was going to ask you if you could pull up that aerial view so attendees can see what we're talking about. And everyone's on the same page.
Now, can you see this map, or can you only see my files?
Just your file for now. Nope.
Okay.
There
How
you
about
go.
now?
Yes.
Okay. So this orange zone is the highway business zone. This is the existing building with the gas pumps and the canopy. This area right here where the trees are and the road doesn't have a zoning district because it used to be part of the right of way, and I believe they have worked with, or they're in the process of getting a portion of this from the state, so that they could expand their facility, the owner, so that they could have this land to include in their project area. So they would like to have the full project area, the full property in the highway business zoning district. And so this is on the corner of Walper Street, is right here.
It's right next to the new Mazda dealership, right across that Walper Street. So Abby, you mentioned you believe they're rectifying that problem with the state. Do we run into a problem if we vote to agree to do this and they haven't fixed that problem?
I will double check, but I believe they've been working with them for the last several years, 5 years, about on that.
Oh, so it's a certainty.
So that's why the area, roads aren't typically zoned. So the right of way was just left off the zoning map.
Right.
So I'll double check with them on if that abandonment process has gone through, and just double check those property lines, because I'd recommend zoning the full property lane.
Are we in an urgent situation from the sports perspective, or can we wait till that question has been surely answered?
I recommend, getting ready for Springtown meeting. That's what we had met with them somewhat.
So we don't need to
recently.
vote on this tonight.
No, you don't need to vote on this tonight, but think about it for, Springtown meeting.
Okay. Any questions from board members? Okay. Don't see any. So Abby, we can move on from this one. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, you have a question in the Q&A.
I do. You're right. Sorry, I missed that. And it's from Avi Glazer again. Does the family own other land in Westwood? He's talking about this,
The
the Shell
company,
station?
they also own the one that they redeveloped a few
other
years
shell.
ago. The Covia is the property owners. They own the other gas station.
So presuming he's asking the question about the Shell station, that's the answer. They own the other Shell across the street by the motel. Okay, I hope that answers his question. Okay, that's it for zoning work session, right?
Right. Well,
The
those
other-
were my recommendation. Those were the major ones. The solar and the housing choice. I think those are the big ones for you to work on over the next several months. I'll check in with the building commissioner. I know he always has maybe some, minor recommendations for some wording changes that we could bring forward. But I think these are the two big ones that you'll need to work on, over the next several months.
All right. Next order of business would be approval of the minutes from the June 29th meeting. Did everyone have a chance to read? Okay. Looks like everyone did. So I would take a motion to accept the minutes. No one has any amendments? Any changes like to see made? I didn't see any.
I'll move to approve or to accept the minutes.
Second.
Okay, a motion and a second. Any further discussion on the minutes from June 29th of this year? Seeing none, I will do a roll call vote. Tom, you were there for that meeting, right? You were part of this.
It was indeed. I
That was your
vote
first
yes.
one. Okay. As brief as it was. Tom, what do you vote?
Yes.
Okay. Kate,
Yes.
Ellen,
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
I vote yes as well. So the meeting minutes are approved as submitted. And then Abby wanted to talk about our schedule for the fall. I believe we're scheduled through September right now.
Right. So right now you have a schedule that we reviewed previously for your next meetings, August 17th, August 31st, September 21st. And then I had some suggested dates for October through December. If you had a chance to look at, I suggested next would be October 12th. And then Monday, October 25th, because Tuesday, the 26th is going to be the special election for the school project. There is, special town meeting, and then it's a two-step process that it needs town meeting vote and a ballot vote. So I'd recommend not meeting during an election day. And then I suggested November 9th, November 30th, and then December 14th. I was just trying to avoid holidays and schedule the meetings either 2 to 3 weeks apart. If anyone has any issues, let me know, or, then we'll, confirm these dates and I get them on the website. And this schedule assumes that there's no town meeting in November. So if that were to change, then we can make some scheduling adjustments.
Okay, does anyone have a personal conflict with any of these dates going forward?
No, they all work.
Okay. Don't see any objections to these dates, Abby, so why don't you go ahead and put those in? And the summer schedule was, we only have one left, or two left, really. Does anyone have a conflict with the 2 August dates? Because we made that prior to possibly people making summer plans, so I just wanted to say, okay, it doesn't look like anybody has a conflict there. All right, and just a reminder, if you are now due to take the online ethics through Dottie Power's office, ethics training. Sorry, we just got a Q&A question from Avi saying, I'm asking to see if we can swap for agreement. I really don't know what he's talking about. Abby, do you? Okay, I don't want to disregard the question, but I don't know what swap for agreement means pertaining to what we've been talking about. I assume the Shell station, but I don't know. Okay. Anyone else have any comments, concerns, things to report from any boards or committees that you're on, or? All right. Seeing nothing, I guess we'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to adjourn. Any further talk on that? All right, we'll do a roll call vote. Dave,
Yes.
Ellen,
Yes.
Kate,
Yes.
Tom.
Aye.
I vote yes as well. So we are adjourned, and we'll see you on the 17th of August. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Everybody.
Okay, thank you all.